Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the MBOM podcast. I'm so excited that you decided to join me for another episode of the show. And this week on the podcast, I am super excited to be joined by Mado Hesselink, who is a yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and the founder of the Yoga Teacher Resource podcast, which I was really lucky to be a guest on about a month and a half ago. And getting to talk with Mado, not only for my podcast, but also for hers, gave me a really good insight into just who she is in the yoga space. And Mado and I are really on the same page with regards to how yoga teachers can create careers where they make sustainable livings and teaching people business lessons in general. So on this episode of the podcast, Mado and I talk about how to change the yoga industry from the inside out. And she talks about what exactly that is, what it means, and how as yoga teachers, we can actually start branching out from simply just teaching in yoga studios. Before we dive into that, we've got today's Schedulicity hot tip of the week with Jaime. So here is that.
Hello, yoga business badasses. This is Jaime with Schedulicity. Sometimes people assume that a career in yoga means only being a yoga teacher. And while you may spend a lot of time teaching group classes, there are so many different ways to market your skills. You might offer one-on-one training or online consulting sessions, as well as various workshops or retreats. When you use Schedulicity, you manage your group classes and one-on-one services in one place, opening up your schedule to the many possibilities in your yoga career.
And as always, thank you so much to Schedulicity for sponsoring the podcast. And thank you to you guys for your questions about Schedulicity, for reaching out and letting me know what a great platform it is, how you've gone ahead and signed up for it, how it's changed your yoga business. I really, really love hearing stuff like that. So you guys can check out more about Schedulicity at schedulicity.com. Or if you have any questions for them, you can reach out at support@schedulicity.com. And I really love today's hot tip of the week because it relates really nicely to what we're going to talk about on the podcast. So without further ado, here is Mado. Welcome to the podcast today, Mado. I'm really excited to be chatting with you.
Thank you, Amanda.
And where are you joining me from today?
I live in Asheville, North Carolina.
Oh, amazing. I don't know why I didn't know that you lived there, but I went there a couple of years ago when I lived in Atlanta, and it's incredible.
I love it. I have been here for over 20 years now.
Ah, that's amazing. Okay, well, hopefully I'll get to go again and we can actually meet in person because I just loved Asheville. I was like, this is just a little at least for me being from Western Canada, I was like, this is like a little hidden gem that I had no idea existed.
Yeah, people know about it in the region, but it's not well known internationally yet.
Yeah, I think that's good. We'll keep it hidden a little bit longer.
I know it's kind of a losing proposition. It's getting busier and busier. I live actually really near the downtown area, but I end up going outside of downtown when I want to go out to eat or anything like that because it's just so full downtown with visitors.
Yeah.
And so it's people who don't know where they're going, and so it's hard to find a place to park, and so it's being discovered, but that's okay because we got to share the good places.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel that as well. When I'm at home in Canada, I live in like just outside of Banff National Park, which is like the most visited national park in all of Canada. There's always a part of me that's like, man, there's so many tourists in the summer, but then I'm like, it's beautiful here. Like, there's a reason why I live there, and if I get to enjoy it, other people should get to enjoy it too. But it's definitely challenging when it like feels like you're home and you're like, I kind of want to just enjoy it myself.
I know.
Amazing. So I'm curious if we can start by backing up a little bit. Can you tell me about your yoga story and how you first got into yoga?
Definitely. I first was introduced to yoga in college. I was a theater major, and my professors would incorporate some yoga into some of our theater classes. And some of my professors also did martial arts. So the first thing I got into more seriously was martial arts, karate specifically. And while I was doing karate, it was really intense on my body. And I started to really enjoy the little snippets of yoga that I experienced in my classes. It felt like such a soothing balance to the intensity of the karate. And so more and more, I was attracted to it. And after I finished college and moved away, I got pregnant. And I was actually signed up for a teacher training, a yoga teacher training, when I got pregnant. And I ended up dropping out of that one and picking it back up when my daughter was 2. But basically, when my daughter was born, I had the realization that I had to choose, that I wasn't going to be able to be a serious martial arts practitioner and a serious yoga practitioner. And at that time, especially, the more gentle, it felt more holistic, gentle, and nurturing. And so that was what I needed. And that's the focus that I took.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I actually did karate when I was little too, maybe not to the same extent, but it's kind of interesting to hear about that like martial arts background into kind of that yoga background. And after, I guess, like while you were practicing, what was it that kind of drew you to wanting to become a yoga teacher?
Like many of us yoga teachers, I experienced a sense of peace and wholeness through my practice of yoga that I wanted to share. I felt like, I still feel that it's not fair to hold it to yourself when you have that kind of experience. And, I also have struggled with depression and anxiety for my whole life. Not severe enough. I've never been diagnosed, but as I have gotten older and older and people around me have been diagnosed, I've come to understand my experience of the world through that lens. So most of us, I think, come to yoga because it helps us feel better. It helps us to make peace with the world. And we want to share that. We feel it's our dharma, our duty, but our sacred duty and our joyful duty to share it with the world. Or at least with whoever is interested around.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I can definitely relate to that too. Like just having this experience that it was like, I don't know exactly what it was. Like I can't put my finger on the exact thing, but there was just something about like showing up on the mat and having this time for myself that I was like, other people, like I want to share this with other people. Like other people need to experience this. And yeah, I think it is for a lot of us. It's like having this powerful experience that we exactly like you said, like we feel like we can't just like keep it to ourselves.
Yeah. And as we look around us and we look at our culture, we see so much disconnect and so much pain and so much suffering that is unnecessary. And so it feels really important to share whatever tools we can possibly find that will help to reduce that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so you have, a young child at this point, like a young daughter, you start teaching yoga. What did that sort of look like for you? Like, what was the start of your career like?
So first, 2 things. First, I started teaching at the YMCA. And I started teaching at the yoga studio where I trained. The YMCA was a little earlier. They actually offered me a job before I was certified. And I had these really polar opposite experiences at these 2 places. The Y, it was incredibly affirming. Very quickly, I developed a following there, and I had the opportunity to teach these enormous classes, which I don't know that it was the best for the students that I was teaching these enormous classes, but it was fantastic training for me. I think of it as my second teacher training.
Mm-hmm.
At the studio, on the other hand, I was teaching classes with 2 people, and I would have these lovely, beautiful 2 souls who showed up to my class week after week, but nobody else came for at least a year. It was like 2 people. So at the Y, I felt very affirmed in my path. I felt like I had a purpose, like I was making a difference. And at the studio, I felt like I really was questioning myself. And am I cut out for this? Am I good enough for this? Is this going to, is it worth putting myself out there over and over and over? Clearly, I was making no money, right? At the studio model, it was like $4 a person or something like that. So if you considered my childcare, I was losing money by teaching.
And so, with that, were you working another job as well, or how were you kind of making ends meet as like a new yoga teacher who's like not, kind of like not even making enough to balance out like putting your daughter in daycare or getting a babysitter while you teach?
Right. Well, probably in the very beginning, I was just at home with my daughter, and my partner at the time was supporting us. When she was, I think, 5 or 6, we separated. And by that time, I was doing some freelance web design as well. I had taken a bunch of computer classes, including some HTML coding classes in college. And this was in the mid to late 2000s. And so the internet was really just taking off. There was a lot of opportunity. A lot of people were starting to feel like they needed a website, but really, and this is still the case today, many people feel they need a website, but are very intimidated by it. So I was able to, and by the time I separated from my older daughter's father, I had more classes. I was more experienced. I was beyond the whole, 2 people per class phase. But I definitely needed to have another job.
Yeah, definitely. I think that makes sense for sure. And I like personally for me, and maybe you can tell me how you feel about this. Like I really like having something on the side from teaching. Like I really believe that yoga teachers can and should be able to make enough money teaching just yoga if that's what they want to. But I really like kind of having like other stuff on the side. Are you still doing kind of that like web design and freelance work as well as your teaching and being a podcast host and all that good stuff?
I am not. I mentor and coach yoga teachers. And what I love about it is that it allows me to engage some other sides of my personality and other aspects of my knowledge and background while still in the context of teaching yoga. So whenever I work with yoga teachers, it's always within this framework of understanding that ultimately what we are working on has to fit in with the ethics and goals of yoga. So, I totally agree with you. It's great to engage multiple sides of yourself. And for many yoga teachers, that might look like doing 2 completely different things. And at this stage, I've been teaching for 15 years. So now it feels really great to pull it all back in and integrate everything into one more streamlined business model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that too, especially like I feel like you've probably, taught so many places, taught so many different people, seen like the yoga industry shift and change over the last 15 years. Like I feel like you have a lot to offer for newer people kind of getting into the industry, trying to, make money. Like, people who are in the same situation that you were in, 15 years ago, getting paid very minimal amounts teaching and not having that many people show up to classes. So I think it's really incredible that you're able to kind of like turn around and provide that as a service for other yoga teachers who are newer into the space.
Yeah, I just want to provide them with the information that I wish I had known back then. I have, like you said, I have learned so much through trial and error and not in the most efficient, effective way. And so it's such a joy to be able to shortcut that knowledge transfer for people.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. What are some of the biggest things that you feel like you've learned over the last couple of years? Like if there's newer people listening to the podcast who are like, okay, give me like a couple of these little gems of wisdom that you've learned. Like what are those kind of top things?
Well, first of all, very few people are going to make a sustainable living teaching yoga within the studio business model. The studios are designed to make money for the studio owners. Some studios are successful enough that they can take a few teachers under their wings, but rarely will those studios are going to be big and they're going to have like 50 or 100 teachers, and maybe 5 or 10 of those will be able to make a decent living because they'll be kind of their more senior teachers teaching at their advanced level offerings. But especially if you're just starting out, looking to the yoga studio, it is unlikely to be, I mean, there's very different paths, and there's a path for everyone. Some people will thrive in the studio business model. But what I notice is that many people, and this is what it was like for me when I was coming up, I didn't see any other options. The yoga studio was the only venue that I knew to create a career teaching yoga. And so that's the biggest thing that I would love for yoga teachers to understand, is that for most yoga teachers, the studio is not going to be the most nourishing, most effective, most successful, or even the most, for lack of a better term, yogic way for them to offer yoga.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah. I think that was like one of my kind of like quick realizations when I started teaching yoga, as I started I feel like I'm definitely like more analytical than like the average yogi. And I think it's because like I came from this like business background, and my mind just started thinking about like, okay, so if this is how much I get paid per class and I'm exhausted after I teach like 3 classes a day, like I just started like working the math, and I was like, I don't think I can like ever make enough money to really be like comfortable in the lifestyle that like is my goal to live just doing this. And I think that was like a big kind of eye opener for me as a new yoga teacher, which sort of inspired like the whole thing with MBOM and all that good stuff. But yeah, I think that not to like discourage people, I think that teaching in studios is like a great way to meet students, to teach group classes, to kind of engage with people. But yeah, I think definitely not like the most financially viable, depending on your financial goals.
Yeah, and you have to base it on what works for you. So you might, if you're given an opportunity to teach in a studio, you might give it a shot for 3 months and see, does this feel fair? You know, at the end of class, do you feel depleted or do you feel energized? When you look at your paycheck, does your heart sink, or do you go, oh my God, I was just paid this much for teaching yoga. This is awesome, whatever that is. And then make decisions, and don't be afraid to change course if what you're doing isn't working for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's a really good thing to remember, is like, and I think that goes with like all careers that you're doing and all kind of paths that you're down on. Like, I think it's really important to kind of always be reevaluating, like, is this thing still serving me? Like, is it still working? And I think that, you know, for most people listening, you can probably like relate to this feeling of being like, you know, something doesn't feel right about this. Like, I need to make a shift. And I think that oftentimes when we work so hard to get, you know, a position with a yoga studio and something consistent, then we feel like, oh, but I don't want to give up this thing that I worked so hard for. But at the same time, if it's not serving you anymore, I think, you know, it's important to kind of listen to that and move in that direction.
So true. I do see and hear about, and have even experienced that with myself, of these positions are so hard to get. I really need to think long and hard before letting it go. And I will say that I have hung on to classes that I should have let go of probably years before, because it is absolutely my experience that when you let go of something, you make room in your brain and in your life for something else. And when there's that space, then you can be more intentional about what you want to bring into that space.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. I completely agree with that. I think that that's a really good thing to remember for all areas of life, but yeah, especially when it comes to teaching yoga. And I think, you know, exactly like you said, it is easy to get caught up in that mindset of like, oh, I'm so lucky to have this position, or this is such a good time slot. Like, what if I never get this again? Like, it's so easy to talk ourselves out of those things. But I think we really need to trust, like, I don't know if it's like intuition or just gut feelings or just kind of like, going in the way that our brains and our hearts are kind of telling us is right to do, even if it like doesn't necessarily make sense on paper.
Right. I think that leads me to the concept of making mistakes. I think it's a good idea to make lots of mistakes, including letting go of classes that you shouldn't have because you had this certain feeling, because that's going to teach you more about what that feeling means. Oh, that was just me being afraid. That wasn't really my intuition telling me that this was the wrong class for me. And you can start to learn to interpret the signals from your body and your mind more effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I really love that. And so I feel like it's kind of a good segue into kind of our main topic for this podcast episode. And when we were kind of chatting back and forth behind the scenes about what we were going to talk about, you had a number of really, really awesome topics. And I was like, I kind of want to talk about them all, but I don't think we can cover them all in an hour. So one of the things we're going to be talking about today is remaking the yoga industry from the inside. Can you tell me kind of like what that means to start with?
Absolutely. Yoga teachers are the aspect of the yoga industry we are on the ground level. We are the most connected piece of the yoga industry, of the providers to the consumers. So in some ways that makes us, it can end up putting us in the position of being the cog in the wheel, or it can end up putting us in the position of having a really huge impact. And so to me, changing or remaking the yoga industry from the inside is about empowering yoga teachers and prioritizing the student-teacher relationship over some other entity that is designed primarily for profit making, whether that be a yoga studio or a video platform or maybe even a gym. There can be other structures. But if there's a structure, if there's a third party in the student-teacher relationship whose primary goal is money making, this is going to hinder the student-teacher relationship, and it's going to hinder the ultimate growth of the students. So when I think about remaking the yoga industry from the inside, I think about empowering teachers and empowering teachers to create business models that are innovative and that work for them with their specific location, population, interests, and talents.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so excited to dive into this a little bit because I think that, again, kind of like entering the yoga industry and being like, okay, I'm going to do the math on this, like how many classes I need to teach to make enough money, realizing like, okay, so that's probably not going to really work for me. And then going, okay, like who is successful in this industry and how are they doing it? And kind of being like, okay, I think we need to look outside the box a little bit. I think we need to like step outside of the studio and look at other areas where we can teach, other places where we can teach. And so I guess my next question for you is in terms of like empowering yoga teachers to kind of shift their mindset, like what is sort of like the first step in doing that? If somebody's listening being like, hell yes, like I need to do this, but how do I even start to do that?
The first step, maybe a little bit counterintuitive, but is considering who you are really driven to serve. So it's considering we could call it an ideal student. Sometimes people misunderstand the term ideal as in that the student needs to meet some sort of standard. That's not what I mean at all. What I mean is, what type of person are you best positioned and most excited about sharing yoga with? It's a little counterintuitive because yoga teachers and kind of the old model, we've been taught to look in ourselves at, oh, what do I want to share? And then whoever is attracted to me is going to come. And you know what? That actually worked pretty well back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was this wave of demand for yoga. And people didn't know a lot about yoga. They were just like, "Oh, I want to do yoga." And there wasn't that many yoga teachers. So a yoga teacher could just kind of put themselves out there. People would find them and they would be successful to some degree, depending, of course, on their ability to harness that and ride that through the shifts and changes that came later. But the way the yoga industry is now, there's still tons of people who don't do yoga. But the number of people who are yoga curious but have never tried it are lower compared to the number of eager yoga teachers there are ready to meet their needs. So figuring out who you want to attract, I think, is an essential first step to creating a sustainable, profitable, and successful, meaning that you have a big impact on people. Financial success can be great too, and that could be a part of it, but I'm talking in terms of impact. That's the first step. Who do you want to serve? And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can modify it, you can update it, you can even pivot. But you got to pick somebody to talk to so that you can use the language that they're really going to understand, and they're going to know you're the right teacher for them. In this sea of potential yoga teachers, they're going to know this is the person I need to study with.
Yeah, I love that. And so if somebody's listening and they're like, okay, great, that sounds good. Like, how do you actually go about like figuring out who this person is? Like, how do you kind of narrow it down, especially if you've been kind of following maybe that like older model of teaching and just seeing who's coming to your classes and seeing who's resonating with what you offer?
Great question, Amanda. This is one of the first things when I work with people one-on-one. This is one of the first things that I go through with them. Some of it is going to depend on the individual and their level of experience, how long they've been teaching, what context they teach in. But one of the things that I will ask is think through your regular classes, your weekly classes. And chances are you can probably think of one or two or maybe a handful of students that really stand out to you as being the most rewarding for you personally to teach. The thing is that this is going to vary from person to person. So you could have a really lovely human who attends classes with 3 different teachers. And for one of those teachers, they're going to be like, yes, this student is the one that really lights me up when I interact with them. And the other teachers, they might be like, yeah, I love that student, but there's this other student that really, for some reason, I just vibe with. So that's the first step, is to evaluate the people you're already working with and see who comes to your mind first when you think about the people who it gives you energy to teach, that it's just exciting and fun to teach. Then start to see if there's any similarities. Like if you have 5 people that are on that list of your most fun students, what do they have in common? Is it their age? Is it their occupation? Is it their status as parents or non-parents? What is it? Is there anything that they really have in common? And that's a really good starting place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great way to sort of narrow it down. And then so once people have gone ahead and kind of figured out like who this sort of ideal market or target audience is the next step to start building out offerings that these people are going to be interested in? Or what is the next step with this?
What I recommend for the next step is actually to have conversations with those people, and then to find more people who fit the same demographic that you want to target to have more conversations with. So as an example, say you determine that it's retired women in their 60s and 70s that are the people that you really want to work with. And you've got 3 or 4 of them in your classes. You can invite them out to have tea with you. You can chat with them after class, but it's nice to set aside a container for having a deeper conversation. And you bring a pen and paper, and you basically just say, hey, you know what? I really enjoy teaching you. I would like to figure out how to attract more people who are like you. Would you be willing to have tea with me and answer a few questions? Almost inevitably, those people are going to be thrilled to do that, because it's very unlikely that you're going to feel this special connection with them that's not reciprocated. They're going to feel the same way about you, and they're going to be excited to help you and really flattered that you recognize them and you see them as this valuable person. So you sit down with them and you ask them, basically, in your own words, why do you do yoga? What is it that keeps you coming back? What you're trying to determine is, what is the top of mind problems that yoga solves for them? What are the things that they think about on a regular basis, that they worry about on a regular basis? Or what are their goals that they think about on a regular basis that yoga helps them with? And then you want to really listen to the language that they use. What are the words? Do you hear balance a lot? Do you hear peace? What are the exact words that they're using? And write that down. And then ask them at the end, do you have any friends who are very similar to you, who maybe don't do yoga yet, but you think might be willing to do a quick phone call with me? And if hopefully they'll say yes, and they'll refer some people to you, and you could have a similar conversation with people who don't do yoga yet. And you can ask them the same questions. Well, you wouldn't ask them, why do you do yoga? You would ask them, what are the things that keep you up? What are your goals? And then you can also ask them, what do you think about yoga? Why don't you do yoga? And through that, you'll start to get a picture of this person, this type of person that you can help through yoga. And then when you understand what their goals and their fears and their worries are, that's when you start creating programming specifically that speak to those. And the cool thing about that is, when you do it that way, the marketing copy for your offerings is pre-written. You don't have to come up with something that you want to teach and then figure out how to sell it to people. The sales comes first, or the understanding of how this is helping people comes before you even write the content. So the content and the sales copy are basically the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it really easy to sell, because you know that you're offering, that you're telling them the truth. There's this deeper level of satya in your sharing about this offering, because the copy, what you're talking to them about the offering, is exactly what the offering is.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's such a great way to kind of just be, communicating with your people. I think that sometimes there's this, maybe a fear around talking to the people who are coming to classes, or feeling like you don't want to bother them, or that sort of thing. But I know personally, as a student of yoga, when I moved to Atlanta, I went to a yoga studio to make friends. So I was that student who wanted to engage with teachers, and I wanted to be their friend and kind of hang out and stuff, because I was looking for community, which I think, yoga offers a lot, but community is one of those things. It's so awesome to go to a yoga class and be with people that you're friends with who are like-minded. And I think as a teacher, if those people are your ideal target market, those are the people that you want on a retreat with you. How fun is it to think about going to, a beach in Thailand for a week, or to the mountains in Asheville for a weekend, and spending time with those people. So yeah, I really love that. I think that that's great.
Yeah.
And so then from there, we're creating these offerings based off of these conversations. Is there any other kind of follow-up steps after that kind of come along with this sort of concept of building these businesses?
Well, you want to be constantly measuring the effectiveness of what you're doing. trying new things, making mistakes, celebrating those mistakes, and then trying other things. I think that's just like any business.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I think, it's always important to be getting feedback and having those conversations around that. Like if somebody does come to a workshop or a retreat, like asking them what they thought, asking them how it could have been better, asking them, what they want to do next month or next year and that sort of thing. I think that that's definitely a really important step to it.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I see that yoga teachers seem to resist, many of them, at least many of the ones that I work with, is tracking numbers and tracking effectiveness of different programs and different forms of marketing. So I have this, one of my longest term, most amazing clients. Her name is Miranda, and she has a yoga and hiking company where she leads yoga hikes in the Asheville area. And as we started working together, I would ask her all these questions about, okay, so you're advertising on this website, how many leads have you gotten? She'd be like, I don't know. And so, through our work together, we started developing systems to track, but still, because we started working together mid-year, by the end of the year, I was like, okay, we're going to go through and we're going to see what worked and what didn't last year. And everything was in like 15 different places. And it was clear she had not been paying attention. She had not been, she is on top of things. She is like such a go-getter. She has so much integrity and I love working with her so much, but this is a particular blind spot for her. This is a place where she has avoided taking leadership. So that's our big focus for this year. Is we are creating systems so that she can keep an eye on all the numbers in her business, what's working, what's not working on a monthly basis so that she can more easily shift approaches when she notices that something's not working, that she doesn't have to expend a lot of money or expend a lot of energy on an approach that's not working, that's not, paying dividends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that that's a super, super important thing to remember. Are there any like softwares or platforms that you recommend for kind of keeping track of things? Or do you guys kind of just like create spreadsheets together?
I create spreadsheets. I think for most yoga businesses, if you don't have a studio, most yoga businesses, a spreadsheet is fine. For her, she does have employees, so we may end up she's been using QuickBooks, but it doesn't integrate with her bank. So she's been having some challenges with that. It's going to be case by case basis, but I do think that for most yoga teachers, a spreadsheet is fine. I use spreadsheets and it's plenty.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I have a pretty detailed spreadsheet as well. And I think for me, I feel like I'm like pretty on top of my stuff too, but I think it was like after the first year of being self-employed, when my accountant was like, so I need like this information and this. And I was like, oh my God, you need all this stuff? Like, I don't know where any of this crap is. And like, I'm the type of person who has like file folders like labeled at home and like really organized. And I was like, man, this is like a whole new ballgame for me. And now I've got like really intricate spreadsheets that just make it so easy to pop my numbers over to my accountant or to pop into my taxes and to keep track of that stuff. So I think it's like one of those things that once you get in the hang of a system that works, it's just so much easier. Like it saves this massive headache of trying to figure out everything over the course of a year. And then, on top of like the legality of needing to like file taxes and that sort of thing, it's just being able to look at like, okay, what aspects of my business are bringing in money, what's working, what's not. And it helps you kind of like set goals for the next year, exactly like you and Miranda are doing, which I think is like equally as important as, being organized for tax season.
Absolutely. And what that makes me think of is a bigger mindset shift that yoga teachers need to make if they want to be successful. Again, remembering that success is sometimes about income, but more about, and definitely about impact. We need to think of ourselves as entrepreneurs. In order to have more impact, we have to learn the skills of entrepreneurship and apply the systems that other people have worked out, and of course, create our own systems. But until we make that mindset shift and become willing to learn those skills, we're going to limit our own impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's really important, is that sort of like shift in mindset as to how you identify yourself as a yoga teacher. And so one of the things that I'm curious about kind of with this topic is we were talking about, the way that yoga studios are kind of set up is more for like the studio owners to make money. And we want to empower yoga teachers to kind of step out and create these businesses. In terms of getting clients, do you feel like do you kind of consider the studio classes to be sort of like top of the sales funnel, like the thing where you're encountering the most people, kind of finding this target market and then kind of, getting your clients to work with you more one-on-one from there? Or what's sort of like the process of, I guess, going from being like a studio teacher to building out these businesses?
Such a great question, Amanda. Rarely do I think that the yoga studio is the most effective top of the funnel. For some people, it will be. For many people, it won't, especially if they're still trying to kind of make it at a studio. If you happen to be wildly successful at one or more studios, that could be the top of the sales funnel. However, remember that the studio owner is not going to be thrilled about you using their studio as your sales funnel. And many of them even have boundaries, guidelines, non-competes in place to prevent that. So for most people, I advise looking outside the yoga studio, and where you look is going to be based on two things. One is who you're looking for, and two is who you are and what your network is. So to take the first one, who you're looking for, if you go back to the example of the retired older woman, I would look at, say, gardening clubs. I would look at like the Arboretum supporter memberships. I would look at knitting stores. Think about what else do they do with their time? Where else do they congregate? Where else do they gather? And find a way to make connections there. For the second piece, your own personal network, the clearer you can be about who you serve and what you help them with, the easier it is for people to refer other people to you. So when you talk to people in your network, you talk to your friends, your coworkers, you talk to your acquaintances, your parents' friends. If you're like, yeah, I'm a yoga teacher, I teach yoga, they're all like, oh, great. And they picture this, if they don't do yoga, they picture this person putting their foot behind their head and they think, yeah, I don't know anybody who does that. They can't really, it's too general. And there's a misconception about what that means. If, on the other hand, you say, I help elder or master gardeners. Let's say master gardeners. That's a nice way of saying it, right?
Yeah.
Of course, you're gonna refine this. This is all off the top of my head, and you're gonna refine this based on your population. But I help master gardeners balance out the rigors of bending over their gardens through movement, and I help them to enjoy and appreciate. Say you teach outside, maybe you teach at the Arboretum, and I help them to really enjoy and appreciate the gardens they've created, or whatever. Right? The whole point is that it's very clear who you serve and how you help them. When you do that, when you share that with your network, people will start popping into their heads of, oh, well, my sister's best friend is a master gardener. I should tell her about your class. So those are the two ways that that I would think of over the yoga studios. And another reason that the yoga studios maybe aren't the greatest top of the funnel for most people is that they are attracting people who are already in a rhythm and pattern with yoga, and they already kind of think they know what yoga is. And so they are a little less open-minded to they already have their ideas and they already have their path. So if it happens to be that is, say you want to take the people who come to your yoga classes and take them on retreat, yes, absolutely. You have a lot of people coming to your classes. It's the right socioeconomic status. Yes, you can do that. But unless that feels like, if you think about using the yoga studio as the top of your funnel, if that feels exciting to you, then absolutely go for that. But if that feels daunting or like, wouldn't know where to start, then look somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point about, studio owners. And I think that, everyone's a little different in kind of how they run their yoga studio. And something I always tell people is like, if you're offering workshops elsewhere or retreats, that are not connected to the studio, or even like having email lists, like I think it's really important to make sure that the studio owner is okay with that, since it is their business. And I think that, some studio owners are fine with that and some aren't. So maybe it's kind of about, if you want to use the yoga studio as the top of your sales funnel, like really, finding those studio owners that are kind of in alignment with what you kind of believe as a yoga teacher. And that might be easy if you're in a big city, or it might be more challenging. The yoga space is just kind of different everywhere. But yeah, I like the idea of being able to kind of attract people outside of the studios and not kind of be reliant on that for finding your students.
Remember that only 10% of Americans have practiced yoga.
Yeah, for sure. Which I think when you kind of step into the space of like identifying as a yogi or a yoga teacher, I think it's really easy to forget that. I was listening to a podcast episode with Being Boss. I don't know if you've ever listened to it before, but awesome podcast kind of about creative entrepreneurship. And they were talking about how it's so interesting because once you're kind of like so deep in an industry, you feel like every single person is doing that. So when you become a yoga teacher, it's like a lot of your friends are yoga teachers. You are basically like in yoga studios or areas offering yoga all the time. And it feels like every single person is doing the same thing as you. But in reality, it's like we kind of have to step back and look at the bigger picture. And it's like so many people aren't doing yoga in truth.
And think of how much more impact you can have on somebody who isn't yet doing yoga.
Totally. Yeah. So I guess that makes me think about, if we're not using the yoga studios as kind of our way to get clients or to kind of be finding these people that we want to work with or finding our target market, what are some ideas for, doing classes outside of the studio? Like, I think we hear a lot like, offering donation classes or doing something like in the park or in your community hall or maybe at like a local gym. But what are some other kind of ideas for getting classes started? And I also know that this is totally going to be dependent on your target market.
Right, definitely. Well, one option is and this is that kind of the low overhead, low effort model, is go somewhere that's already offering classes to your target market. So for example, there are lifelong learning university, like through the university, there are programs specifically for seniors that are already offering classes. You can partner with them, you can get hired by them or create some kind of contract with them to teach where seniors already are. So that's one option. Another option would be to start or join a more cooperative yoga studio. So it's a place where people are already looking for yoga, already coming for yoga, but the business model, and I actually did a podcast on my podcast, the Yoga Teacher Resource Podcast, with one of my yoga buddies, Kaya Mindlin, in the Bay Area in San Francisco. She runs a cooperative yoga studio where the student-teacher relationship is the center of the business model. And the studio itself is not designed to make a profit. It's just designed to hold a container for that student-teacher relationship. So that's option 2. And option 3 would be to find a space to rent, maybe a martial arts studio that's not being used, a church. What else, Amanda? I'm sure that there are lots of other types of places that, where there's space, but it's not being utilized all the time.
Yeah, maybe like dance studio, even maybe like schools.
Yeah, I used to teach a class to school teachers in their library after school. So I would come to them, and they did all the organizing. They collected the money. They would commit for, I can't remember if it was 6 weeks at a time or maybe a semester at a time, but they would commit, they would collect the money, they would pay me, and I would just show up and teach.
Yeah, I think this is making me think about, obviously, I think, like we said, like the first step is defining the target market. And I think after that, I think it's a lot about kind of like getting creative, like sitting down and thinking about like where these people are, like how do they spend their days, where are the places they're going, and then thinking about like, is there opportunity to offer classes in any of these spaces that they kind of like spend their time in. And I think it's really easy to kind of get into your head that, okay, like I have to teach in the yoga studio. And I think that what I'm like kind of hearing from this conversation is like, it's really important for us to look at how we can create our businesses outside of the yoga studio. And I think it does take like more sort of brain power, creativity, thinking outside of the box. But I think it's such a great way to kind of, get in contact with these people who you can really like serve. And you can really serve from a place of feeling excited to teach them, and they can really like resonate with what you're offering.
Yeah, it's empowering. It's about yoga teachers taking a leadership role in creating the environment that is going to be most beneficial for their students, and also be a win-win for them, where they're compensated for their time, their energy, their passion, their studies in a way that feels fair to them. Because when we give in a way that doesn't feel fair, it's depleting. But when we give in a way that feels fair, then it's energizing, and then we have even more to give. I did an episode pretty recently about charging money for your classes and how to think about charging. And one of the things that I advise people to do is, you balance out how much money you want to make with how do you feel after you do it. Because there is a certain level of energy exchange that happens just through the gratitude of your students, which is why so many yoga teachers are willing to do what I did, of like basically paying to teach for, I think it was like nearly 2 years that I taught that one yoga class in a studio with just 2, or maybe like by the end it was like a handful of people. And then eventually that class actually grew to like 20 people. But in the beginning, I was willing to do it because of the looks on my students' faces at the end of class and what they were saying to me. So, there's a balance. We want to be, but ultimately being fairly compensated is going to have both components. It's going to feel like, okay, I can make a living doing this, or even if it's just part of my living, this is not a drain on my finances. And that can be supplemented with seeing the growth and the benefit for your students.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I think that that's such an important aspect of it. And I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes, because it sounds like it's a really great episode to kind of like tag along with this topic. But I'm curious, like in terms of somebody kind of deciding what to set for their prices, like where do you even start? Because I think one of the things for yoga teachers is like you like meet a studio owner, you do a teaching demo, and they usually just tell you how much they pay. And I think that, I can definitely relate to feeling like, oh, okay, like sounds like a really fair amount. Like I'm happy to teach for that. And then also having the feeling of like, oh, okay, that's what you pay for this. Like I really want this opportunity, so I'm going to say yes to it. But I think that, we kind of don't feel like we have that much power with negotiation when like a studio owner just says like, this is what I pay, and if you want to teach here, this is it, versus being like, okay, so I'm going to create this offering, in a school library or in a senior center, wherever it is that kind of works with your target market, and then having to decide like, okay, what do I charge? Where do you even start to kind of decide that?
Yes, absolutely. That is a question I get a lot. And so ironically, the episode that I did about charging, so I did 2 episodes back to back. One was about the mindset part of it, and then the second part was the nitty-gritty. How do you figure out what to charge? And so I will kind of go over it really briefly here. Obviously, I can't get into the same level of detail that I did in the full podcast, but I'll also say that along with that episode, I created a online calculator so that you can get, you answer a few questions, and then at the end, it gives you kind of a baseline of what you should be thinking as your minimum. And the way, the kind of brief overview is that I take the going rate for a massage, and then I will increase or decrease it based on your level of experience and your niche. So, and also your market. So if you live, say, in a big city and you've been teaching for 15 years and you have a very clear niche, you're going to be able to charge way, way more than if you live in a small town. You kind of just teach anybody who shows up and you just started teaching a couple years ago. So that's kind of the range. Think about, what does a massage therapist charge in your market? And definitely for the first 2 years of teaching, maybe cut that in half. And after you've been, there's like all of these different factors. It's more like a matrix. So if you're really interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of my thoughts on this, listen to that podcast episode. And after you listen, I recommend taking the quiz. Don't take the quiz first because it won't make as much sense.
Awesome. Yeah. There'll be links for that in the show notes, and definitely sound like really, really valuable episodes. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And also super cool that you did that calculator. I feel like my brain loves stuff like that. So I'm definitely down to check that out.
Yeah. Well, I just was getting this same question over and over and over. And as I was creating the episode, I was like, wow, this is really complex. It's going to be hard for somebody, especially if they're driving and just listening. It's going to be hard for them to really take all of these details in. So as long as they get the basic overview so that they understand what I'm asking them in the calculator, I was like, I'll create a calculator and then it'll make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And so is there anything else kind of with this topic, just to kind of wrap it up, that teachers should be kind of keeping in mind? I feel like we've kind of done a good job at kind of covering everything, but is there anything else that people should be aware of when it comes to diving into this?
Well, get help. Don't think that you can just do this all on your own. It is wonderful to listen to all of these podcasts and to read books and, to brainstorm and to have conversations with your students. But being a yoga teacher can be lonely. Sometimes even, and this is not always the case, of course, but I've heard lots of stories from yoga teachers who are like, even my yoga teacher friends, it kind of feels like we're a little bit in competition, so I don't feel like I can be completely upfront with them about everything. I hope that's not the case, but it's definitely a dynamic that happens. So I highly recommend finding mentors, hiring coaches. If you are taking yourself seriously as an entrepreneur, then it's so, so valuable to invest in having somebody who's been there, who can look in a more neutral way at what you're doing and what you're trying to do and give you feedback and advice. That has been absolutely key for me. And based on the work that I've done with other yoga teachers, I've just been so astounded by the progress that they have been able to make. And it's not because of me specifically, it's just that structure of accountability and having an outside perspective. So whether, I know Amanda, I think you do this work, I do it, there's quite a few people starting to enter into this space of coaching yoga teachers. But that's one thing that I have seen to make the difference between somebody really spinning their wheels and being in a state of confusion and overwhelm and having clarity and feeling confident moving forward.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I hired a business coach when I first started working for myself a couple of years ago. And I mean, I think I have him to thank for actually like getting MBOM up and going. Like, I just feel like when somebody can come and sort of give you that little push or that little accountability and help you move through like all those fears and doubts and all the little voices inside of your head that say like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this, or who am I to do this? I just feel like it's so helpful to have that person who's, not like your mom or your partner who's like, you're the best. You're amazing.
Don't put it on your mom or your partner. They will not give you good advice, even though they will love you very much. And, it's such an important relationship, but yeah, somebody that is not emotionally involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. So yeah, that's awesome. And so, with the last couple of minutes that we have left, I'm curious, can you tell listeners a little bit about your podcast, what you do over on your podcast, what you offer, where they can find it, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
My podcast is called The Yoga Teacher Resource, and I started it to be the gap between what yoga teacher trainings are not offering. And some of the information, of course, is going to overlap with some teacher trainings, but it's designed to be the gap. Sometimes it's if you have a 200-hour and you're not quite ready for a 300, what should you be thinking about? But it's also what are the things that even 300-hour trainings, even that higher level training, are not offering. So I have guests to come on to talk about anatomy, to talk about cueing. I also do solo shows, solo episodes. I recently did a really popular 2-episode series on class planning. And then I also talk about the business of yoga. So it's designed to be like a continuing education piece for yoga teachers to fill in some of those gaps and to really take the next step into becoming yoga professionals.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've listened to a number of your episodes, and you talk about such like relevant topics and just get into the details of them. And I'm just really grateful that, that resource exists for yoga teachers. Cause I think, when I entered the world as a yoga teacher, I felt like when I was in teacher training, I just didn't know what I didn't know. So I didn't know the questions to ask. So when they're like, do you have any questions before you like embark on this trip home and start teaching? I'm like, no. But then I got home and was like, oh my God, I have so many questions.
Yeah.
Like I was like totally on this like little, I don't know, like on like a little dinghy in the middle of a big ocean being like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So yeah, resources like yours are super helpful for yoga teachers. And I'll make sure there's a link for that in the show notes. Is there anywhere else that people can go to find you if they want to connect with you, if they want to work with you, maybe hire you, anything like that?
Yeah, my website that covers kind of all of the things that I do, covers the podcast and my coaching, is teachingyoga.net. I also have a Facebook group, the Yoga Teacher Resource Facebook group, and you can go to my website and it'll be really clear how to join the Facebook group and my email list. I do offer a download of 100 yoga class theme ideas for anybody who signs up for my email list. And then I send out weekly emails about the podcast. So would love to stay connected that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation today. This has been such an awesome topic, such an awesome conversation. I'm so glad that we were able to connect.
Oh, thank you so much, Amanda. It was such a pleasure.
All right, guys, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Mado from the Yoga Teacher Resource podcast. Make sure you go and check out her podcast. There'll be a link in the show notes for that. She also does yoga business coaching, one-on-ones with yoga teachers. So if you are feeling like you could really use her services or you want to just chat with her more, definitely make sure you go check that out. So all of those links will be on the show notes at mbomyoga.com. As always, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And you can reach out with any questions, comments, or feedback at info@mbomyoga.com. Just quick before we wrap up, I just wanted to remind you guys there is just a couple more days left in the early bird special for the yoga teacher retreat that I'm co-hosting with Meghan Pherrill from Balance by Meghan. And so that is going to be good until Friday, March 15th. And there'll be a link in the show notes again, but you can also find the retreat on mbomyoga.com/retreats. So you can go ahead there, you can check it out. And the early bird special is just early bird is the promo. So that will also be in the show notes, or you can email me if for some reason you can't get it to work. Totally happy to help. But basically, we're going to be going to Costa Rica for a week. It's November 2nd to 9th. It's going to be a group of like-minded yogis, yoga teachers, wellness professionals, and we're going to be spending time practicing yoga, hanging on the beach, chilling in the pool, waterfall hikes, eating all the good food, and then also doing business workshops. So maybe you're like, I don't want to pay for a week vacation where I also have to do business workshops. But what we're going to do is we're going to balance it really nicely so that you've got lots of rejuvenation time, that time to kind of spark that creative energy. And we're going to make sure that all the business workshops are very hands-on. It's going to be things where you're going to come home feeling relaxed and inspired and rejuvenated and, all blissed out from the tropical goodness, but also feeling like, yeah, I know where I'm taking my business over the next 6 months to a year. I feel like I got something valuable out of this. So if that sounds up your alley, you can check out mbomyoga.com/retreats. You can read more about it, or you can reach out to me, info@mbomyoga.com. And don't forget, if you register, to use that early bird promo. So early bird to get $200 off before March 15th. All right, that's all for today. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.